Today on the Transplant Helper, we sit down with 21-year heart transplant survivor Jordan D. Marcia as he gives us this piece of advice.
Whatever you want to do in your life, get out there and do it.
Well, hey, folks, I appreciate you joining me again today on the Transplant Helper podcast / YouTube video series. My name is Jim Merle. And as I said just a moment ago in the teaser, today we're talking about Jordan's journey. Now, you have no idea who Jordan is as of yet, but I'll assure you by the end of the program, you'll know exactly who he is, because Jordan is a man that I ran across just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, via his YouTube channel, Jordan D. Marcia. And if you'd like to go ahead and subscribe to his channel, you can do that. We'll put links in the show notes below for that in just a moment, as well as how about go ahead and subscribe to this channel. I hope to continue to provide you with content which will both advocate, educate, and yes, I hope even motivate you as a transplant patient. Now, the reason Jordan was important to me as I stumbled across him and he across me is because we share several things alike, but one of which is that we're both heart transplant survivors. However, as many of you already know, at this point in time of recording, I'm only about 4.5 years out. Jordan is a little special in that he's already 21 years out. 21 years out with a single organ, and that is an accomplishment. Most of you already know that, and if you don't, hopefully one day you'll know that. And as I say sometimes to my friends, and I'm sure he would to his, we would like for you to outdo us. So go ahead and try. But Jordan, if you would, just tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us how things got started with you, how you ended up needing a transplant to begin with.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you a lot for that introduction. I really appreciate it. So basically, I was born with a rare congenital heart disease similar to what Jim had, which was transposition of the great arteries. And then I had a lot of underlying problems as well. One of them being plastic bronchitis and a few other issues, not heart related. Those were more lung related. I had 12 other surgeries leading up to the transplant. And then finally getting it on my life-saving organ on June 13th, 1996. But, you know, I was kind of, when I was born, I kind of had some issues growing up. Mostly with just like blood flow and being able to have proper circulation throughout my body. My mom kind of noticed that at a young age and constantly would inquire with the doctors what's going on. Why is, my son like this? And being the firstborn for my family, it's a really big issue. So they wanted to try to stay on top of that as much as they could. When they finally figured out what the problem was, you can imagine the shock to the entire family, especially my mother, who, even now I look back at it and think absolutely incredible for you being able to deal with all that information. She was only 25 when she ended up having me too. So it was a lot for her to deal with too, growing up.
Right. Well, as he mentioned, and he refers to it as transposition of the great arteries. I just simply call it transposition of great vessels. But yes, both of us share in that condition, or at least did before our transplants. And it is I guess you'd say a terrible thing to have because potentially it's going to be deadly. Potentially children, especially if those problems are not corrected, they're not going to live through childhood. They're just not going to make it. I wasn't going to. I'm sure you weren't. And so we need corrective surgeries if they're available. And in this case, transplants. Now, yours came a lot earlier than mine. You were, about 3 years old when this transplant itself took place?
Yes, I was about 3.5 years old when I ended up getting the transplant. Yeah.
Well, I know that I can just remember the stories that my family tells, my parents especially tell about me, and the fear that they faced, during my time of transplant. You mentioned your mother being 25 years old, you being the firstborn. What are some of the things she's mentioned to you about that situation back then?
She was, at first she was stunned that something like this could end up happening. It was kind of just like, it takes you right from the knees, because you think of all these things that could possibly happen. You think about like the life that you want your child to have growing up and everything else. And then something like this happens. It was really unfortunate for her. She and my father both were very strong-willed people. So they kind of pushed through it as much as they could. And they kind of just kept positive and stayed positive themselves, because they felt that if they were positive, then that would kind of trickle down onto me. I would be positive. and that would keep my spirits high. And as you know, if you're a really positive person and you're going through something like this, it really does help with your mentality. It really helps with just the entire atmosphere and what's happening.
Well, I know that even you being 3.5 at the time, and especially having gone through all these surgeries, you grew up kind of dealing with this, but it doesn't change the fact that without them having a positive attitude, without I think having a good outlook on this, you were probably scared to death too, right?
Absolutely. I was scared out of my tree all the time. 3.5-year-old child going in and out of the hospital constantly. And this is prior to even the transplant itself. I spent the first 6 months going back and forth between my grandmother's place and the hospital because that's where we were staying at the time. We couldn't really afford anything else due to the circumstances that we were all kind of in. I remember just, some days you're laying in bed and you're looking around, and I was a really positive child, but you got, a few other friends I had in my rooms with me, same thing. So we try to keep our spirits up within each other, but you wonder and you think and you see what's going on with the other kids around you, and you hear what doctors saying. And the scariest thing was whenever the doctors had to tell your parents something or my parents something, they would ask them to leave the room so they could talk in private. And that always made me think, that's not good news.
And then that puts them back in the position of having to try to come up with a story as best they could to explain whatever the doctor said. And of course, them making all the judgments as to what you need to know and didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for the most part, they would try to tell me the truth as best they could without, scaring the bejeebers out of me because I was a kid. They didn't want to lie, but they also didn't want to tell me too much information, stuff that I wouldn't really need to know.
Right.
And I can imagine that being extremely hard for them as well.
Well, tell me, okay, I know this is difficult. I was 40. No, I wasn't. I almost said I was 42. I was 38-ish when I had my transplant. You being 3.5, that's much different. But tell me what you remember about your time, maybe post-transplant, as early as you do remember post-transplant, about, all the medications, whatever it is you dealt with.
Absolutely. So post-transplant, my first memory I have is right after my surgery. My cardiologist promised me that he was going to buy me a Big Mac from McDonald's, and I was happier than I think I've ever been growing up when he walked into that hospital room and he had that Big Mac for me. And I remember I was ecstatic. My mom, she cried because she never thought that moment was going to happen. I remember being able to go down the slides and run around in the monkey bars at this park called Betty Huff Park, right around the corner from my house, which I could never do before because I was so weak and so tired all the time. And I know I got to play with my friends outside for the first time in a long time. I still have to be careful. It wasn't to the point where, something like a bacteria could get at me and I could get sent back to the hospital like that. It was where I could actually, have a childhood, have a life, have some fun. Building igloos out of snow with one of my best friends, and we built them from recycling bins. And then going inside the igloos and playing around and just having a blast. We built robots out of cardboard boxes, and it was a really fun after transplant. That was, I think, 6.
Right. Well, I can remember not after transplant, but I had my original surgery at 6 months old. It worked very well and held me off to needing a transplant for 30 years or so, more than 30 years. However, I can remember as a child being very limited in what I was able to do, and just the joy of doing whatever it is I could do as a kid, And so when you get an opportunity that you haven't had in your life to that point, you 3.5 years out, and then to start to recover and start to heal, I know you were excited to get out and do anything, even though it may be a little dangerous at times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was one of the best feelings in the world.
Let me ask this then. This is kind of be a side note, and we'll come back to some other stuff. But since you have been and were a congenital patient all these years, how has that helped you to help other people to this point in congenital cases? Because I know when I was growing up, going to the congenital clinics, even though I was always a big guy, growing up, I went congenital all the way till I was an adult. How did you get to counsel? Did you get to help? Did you get to encourage other people back then? Or was that something you were trying to do?
So when I was younger, a lot of the doctors found that I was doing really, really well with my heart. My heart and my body had kind of came together very nicely without having too many problems. And without even being asked, I would just kind of, because I was a very social child, I would just kind of sit down beside people and go to people in their, this is right after transplant too, go into people's rooms and be like, hey, how's it going? My name is Jordan. I just got a heart transplant. Look at my scar. What are you going through? Oh yeah, that's no problem. Make sure like you don't scratch your scabs because that's an issue. And if you ever have, a scratch or something that's bleeding, you got to put pressure on it. You got to make sure it's, it's all good. And as time went on, I sort of got asked to come back and do talks with doctors, parents, and patients, recipients, and people that were just about to go in for surgery or that were on the list, or people that were there that had family members that were waiting, to talk about, some of the things that I've done post-transplant, what's made me so healthy, and to kind of just instill a sort of hope. If you keep going, if you keep pushing, you can get to this point, to stay healthy, to keep active. And the smile that people had, the grins on people's faces when they found out I was, post 12 and now being 20, I found that when people hear that you're those increments all the way up post-transplant, even if it's like 2 years post, for a mother and a father whose child is just going in and you're 2 years post, you're everything. You're a hero. They want to hear, any kind of information that you can give them. So, I always try to be as helpful as possible. I always try to be realistic too. Don't go out and do crazy, insane things. But these are sort of the stepping stones that I took. And you got to be really positive. You got to stay healthy, and you got to keep active. Those are the three of the main things I always say.
Well, let me say this to begin with. I thought I was the transplant helper. You were the original transplant helper. You've been doing that. I did that some too, but of course I wasn't a transplant back then. I was just a pediatric cardiology patient. But I did enjoy going to parents in those waiting rooms and sometimes, in the doctor's office and saying, hey, you know what? I was where your baby was so many years ago, and look where I am now, so you can make it. So I enjoyed that. But did you meet with times in all these 20 some odd years since transplant when you found it be really difficult, maybe some rejection or something like that? I know how common that is, but what all have you dealt with since then?
Yeah, I have dealt with a few different bouts of a few issues. I found that a little bit of depression kicked in when I was a little bit younger growing up, and some of it had to do with the pills, I'm sure, and some of it had to do with watching my friends who were 10 years old being able to, run down the field and play soccer and football and do all these different things where, because of my case and because of what had happened to me when I was younger, I was limited to like a lot of the blood flow within my legs. So I couldn't keep up. And because I couldn't keep up, nobody kind of wanted me to be part of those things. And that kind of took a toll on me. And I found that I had to figure out where I belonged and who kind of would be nice as a child. I mean, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for friends, so you could kind of spend time with.
Concerning depression, that's one of the things I did an episode on just a week ago, dealing with depression. And I've still got a lot more to say about that. That was kind of an introductory episode, but I'll link that up here in the corner down in the show notes anyway. But it is something that we deal with. People think, okay, well, you got a new heart, you got a new organ of whatever kind. Wow, you ought to just feel amazing, but you're so blessed, so you're happy now. No, not necessarily. There's still a lot of emotion to go through. Things are not 100%. I always remind everybody, transplant is a treatment and not a cure. Absolutely. And so you got to live with it. And that's what you're talking about, living with it. So you deal with a little bit of depression. What about sicknesses, illnesses? Was that an issue for you?
Yeah, that was an issue. I remember my mom wanted me to get chickenpox so that I can kind of get over it. Every child should have it. And when somebody who's not immunosuppressed, like myself, gets chickenpox, you get chickenpox. You have to itch, and you're told not to itch, and you go through it, and then you're done. When I got it, I ended up getting pneumonia, and then I had to go back to the hospital. And something that should have taken, 2 weeks ended up taking almost 3.5, 4 months for me to be able to push through that, get through over the pneumonia. That was when I was quite young too. Soon after that, actually, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a form of cancer. I ended up having that when I was 10 years old as well. And that's something that can happen to, as Jim might have mentioned in a few different things, a few different episodes, that we're more susceptible to cancers. And that's due to some of the pills we take. Mine, I don't want to say I was lucky, but I was sort of lucky. It had infected my appendix. So the removal of it was quite simple, but I still had to go onto a form of chemo, which again, right off my feet. I spent most of grade 5 with a central line sitting off the side of my chest, having to sit inside, reading stories and writing stories and reading books while I watched everybody I knew do once again, go out and have fun and be a kid. And it was really hard to watch people do that, knowing that I was finally at a point where I could do that and I still couldn't. And that was a real big struggle. Being with the pills, I know I went into a few different times where I had rejection. Once I was very young and I pushed through that quite fast. And the next time it was a little bit more of a hurdle. And that was caused by a problem with an overdose of prednisone. I was supposed to be taking 2 milligrams a morning, and somebody down the line had made a boo-boo, and I was taking about 10. So luckily for me, I had realized that quite quick. It wasn't months, it was like a week or two, and I was able to try to correct that really fast. But even at 10 milligrams down to 2, as some of you may know, that's massive. It took a toll on me. My attitude had changed, my demeanor changed, my body changed. I wasn't the same person. And then you struggle with all the emotional words with prednisone. And that wasn't even long ago. I think I was like 18, 19 years old when something like that happened to me. So that was a big struggle.
That's very difficult. I mean, there's no arguing that. And as you mentioned, and I have mentioned, I'll say it again, there is an 80% chance. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but we need to know reality here. There's an 80% chance of getting some form of cancer inside of the first 3 years post-transplant. Now, that doesn't mean it couldn't happen outside of 3 years or inside, but inside of the first 3 years, you're at an 80% higher risk of getting some form of cancer. Now, that's typically some kind of skin cancers and such. And obviously those can be treated normally a little bit more easily, but it shows how important it is to do whatever we can. If that's sunscreen, try to prevent what we can, because like in your case, you're not going to stop cancer on your appendix or anything on your own. You're not going to do a whole lot to treat that on your own, but you've got to prevent what you can. You've got to be as cautious as possible, because these times do come. So obviously dealing with a lot there, dealing with depression as mentioned, dealing with the lymphoma, those sorts of things difficult. And some, as you mentioned, some rejection and such comes in. Now, let's move on a little bit further, because originally the reason you caught my eye on YouTube and to begin with, I didn't even realize that you were on YouTube. I guess you'd say, like I'm trying to do, training, telling your story, which by the way you are, and I appreciate that, Jordan. But I saw you as a vlogger, and that's primarily, I guess, what you are, but a vlogger in that you travel, and you travel a lot. That's why most of you are watching may notice I kind of put on the front of the screen here, Jordan's journey. You travel outside of your hometown, don't you?
I do, and quite often.
What got you started on that, and tell us about some of the places you've been, and especially where you're about to go.
I've always been under this impression that life was really short, and I know for heart recipients, it can be a little bit shorter. So I wanted to get out and live my life the best I could, and I found that what made me the happiest was traveling around the world, seeing all these different countries and experiencing different cultures. So far, I've been all around Asia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam. I went to the Philippines. I've been all across the States, and I've been all across Canada as well. I'm about to do a big journey that I'm leaving in September on to travel the rest of Southeast Asia. I'll be going to Australia. I'll be going into New Zealand, and I'm going to try to make my way into Europe, so that I can meet my dad for his 50th, which I'm sure he never thought I'd be a part of, in Germany, which is going to be an amazing thing for both me and him to be able to experience that. Because at 25, he had me, and 25 years later, I'm able to go to some place that he's always wanted to go to and experience that with him on his birthday too, which for me is an amazing thing.
That's going to be awesome. And if I understand this right, and this is part of what I'm looking forward to, and again, I think this is why you ought to be on YouTube a little bit later. You're already there. So just when you finish the video, go ahead and jump over to Jordan's channel. We'll have these things linked together anyway, but go ahead and subscribe to his channel, because if I understand it, you're going to be vlogging this trip, right? Showing us around these places.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like Jim said, I'm going to be vlogging the entire experience. So right now I do 2 times a week for my uploads. I'm going to be switching to daily. They're going to be between 3 to 5 minute long videos, but each episode is going to be a different thing in a country, or a different country altogether. And then weekly, I'm going to try to do videos encapsulating my feelings and just the beauty of that country all into one video, to try to show what life after transplant can be like, why organ donation is so important, why everybody should be an organ donor, and what my heart, my donor has done for me in my life. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do any of these things. So that's why I think it's so important to be able to tell the world, hey, go sign up, go help people like me out, like Jim out, and a lot of you viewers out, so that you can experience life. You don't have to do what I'm doing, but in your own way, doing everything that you want to do within your life, just to make yourself happy.
Right. Because it in your case, for sure, going from 3 to 25, there are so many years in there that are missing if you take away these transplants. For me, I won't go into all the detail of my life, except for to say, I would have been married, I guess, before I needed a transplant. I would have had 2 children, but I would not have known them as long as I have now. And now I've got 5 children and thrilled to have that many. And, that's just some of the things that I've already been able to see and to accomplish. And you too, all these things that you've been able to see, and especially the people I know that you've impacted.
For me, I think that's the most important, is being able to travel is an amazing thing, but the look on people's faces and the expressions people give. And when you get messaged back from people you don't even know around the world saying, hey, your video inspired me. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much. Keep going. That's what keeps me going. That's what pushes me. That's what, at the end of the day, makes me really happy. It puts a smile on my face.
Well, absolutely. And I can tell that you being able to go on these journeys, and I'll use the word again, but your travels, that has enhanced your life, it seems, and has changed you and continue to mold you for the better. And like you say, this is just another level of the way that you're able to reach out, and especially be a good example to those of us that think, okay, I'll get my transplant and then I'll go back and sit in my recliner like I once did, or something. And that's what I haven't done what you've done as of yet, but I always try and encourage people, when and if you get this transplant, hopefully they will, that they try to find a different life from what they had, and try to find a more fulfilling life, whatever that is for them, than what they had. Don't try to make it back to where you once were. Try to make it back, as I say at the end of every program, and I will a little bit later again, to being stronger, to staying stronger, never back to just the strength they once had, but finding more of that. So I see that you're able to do that. Let me ask you one more thing, and we're going to kind of close out here, but
for sure.
Or some things, I assume maybe 1 or 2, but some things that you would like to advise anyone if they're facing transplant, or maybe they're recovering from transplant. What would you advise them on, just to help them out? What's some words of wisdom?
Absolutely. If you're facing transplant, I would say, no matter the age, no matter who you are, stay strong, keep fighting, don't give up, and always think about the positives. I understand that there's going to be like a lot of thoughts going through your mind and there's going to be a lot of things happening. I totally get that. But I feel that if you stick with the positives and you just run it to the ground, you're going to be in a better mood. The better mood you are, the better off you're going to be, and the better off that the transplant, once you do get it, will be received by your body. The other thing I want to say is life is very, very short. It's short for somebody who doesn't have a transplant, and it's shorter for people who do. Whatever you want to do in your life, get out there and do it. Have fun, live your life to the fullest possibility that you can, and never regret anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Take advantage of the gift you've been given, because it is great. Absolutely. I always say it's the greatest physical gift we've ever been offered. Well, Jordan, I really appreciate it. I don't know if we've covered nearly enough bases, and that's fine, because I'll just catch back up with you another day. We'll do this again. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down today and to discuss a little bit about your life and kind of introduce people again. Go ahead and subscribe to his channel. I encourage you to do that. Jordan D. Mercier. I just said that wrong, didn't I? Say it again.
Jordan D. Marcia.
Marcia. I knew I'd mess it up by the end. But anyway, go ahead and subscribe to his channel and check out his videos, because they're just short videos so far. Check them out. They're inspiring and they'll help you out a lot. But especially for my audience, which now includes some of you, I want to encourage you, as always, that if there's ever anything you can do to reach out to help others, this is a community we're trying to grow here. This is something we're trying to really do. And especially if this particular video has helped you in any way, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And we'd love to hear your comments below. Today is the perfect day for you to tell us about your journey. And while you're doing that, we can have a discussion right beneath the video. If you'd like to reach out to me on Twitter, you can do that at transplant_help. I'm also available on Facebook, and any other way you'd like to try to track us down, just search up our names and we'll be there. But until next time, stay stronger, friends.